Hey guys, I want to show you a new controller that we had developed. This is our dual input 12 volt DRL controller. So some cars have two inputs for your DRLs. So if you're using Switchback Halos, or if you're using something like a BlueGhozt controller or our own controller, there's only one input for the DRL function. And many times you're going to want that halo or whatever LEDs in your car, that DRL function for the controller, you're going to want it to work day and night. Now on the many cars that we have on the road nowadays, you have a parking light at night and then you have a DRL during the daytime. And you can't really tap into both of those using that one controller. You would have to use some combination of relays or something like that to try and bring it into one. And there's another problem that some cars have. Subaru is really bad for this. For the DRL, they will actually use the high beam or possibly the low beam at 6 volts as the DRL. And they would also have that parking light as well for the nighttime running lights. This creates another issue because 6 volt is not enough to trigger a Switchback Halo or either one of our other controllers. It does work with our RGB, but one thing to consider about our new RGB lineup is that it still is only one input for DRL. So while it will work with the 6 volt input, it will only work with one input unless you use something to send two signals to that wire. If you were to just hook up both the parking light and the DRL wires together, then you're actually going to be cross-feeding and potentially cause some issues with your car. So that's definitely not recommended. You're going to want to use some kind of a relay or some kind of an isolation device so that way one device does not backfeed to the other device. That's what this is for. So this was developed to have a ground input and two variable voltage inputs. These can be anywhere from 5 volts clear up to 15 volts. And then you have an output side of a ground and a power, and that power will be a 12 volt output. So if you were to hook up your parking lights and let's say your Subaru, you're using your DRLs, which for most of them are the high beam at 6 volts, that 6 volt signal will be converted by this controller to a 12 volt output. And that 12 volt output can run your BlueGhozt. It could run our addressable controller. It could run a set of Switchback Halos. This is rated for up to 1 amp load. And for example, a single 110 millimeter Switchback Halo from us, at least, draws 0.25 amps. So theoretically, pushing to the max, you could put 4 110 millimeter Switchback Halos on this controller and it would be able to push it, getting a 6 volt input, 5 volt input, whatever it may be, and outputting 12 volt to that. So it's basically a buck converter. It up converts that, but it also combines that with the dual inputs as well, and it will convert either side. So if you have some really crazy car that has two 6 volt inputs, you got a 6 volt DRL and you got a 6 volt parking light, I've never heard of one, but let's say you did, this would still work. There is not one or the other for 6 volt. They both will convert from anything from a 5 volt to a 15 volt over to a 12 volt. Now, something else that this can do, and it will depend on the load, but because of the nature of a buck converter, it can also help with PWM which is pulse width modulation. And basically it means that it doesn't give, the car won't give a solid, steady signal, and instead it pulsates. Now this will cause issues if you connect directly to a set of halos or even to a Ghost controller. Now this, it's not designed for that, but it will work on a low load because it does store power in capacitors, and it will eliminate that pulse width. Now, the caveat to that is that this would not work with a switchback. If you're going to use a switchback, you're probably better off with the Diode Dynamics solid state relay. They actually get the power from the battery and then use 2 triggers to activate. That's the biggest difference between this and diodes, is that ours does not require any connection to the battery to get that conversion from 6 to 12. Whereas with diodes, which I've used them, I've still got some, I use them all the time, they have to connect to the battery to get that power. That was why we developed this, is I wanted what diode was offering, but without having to run a separate 12-volt power and ground to get it. And that's where we came up with this one. So these are available on the site, and they are sold single, just one each. So if you do need one for both sides, let's say you have switchback halos and you want to have one for each light, they are available that way. I have also designed a box, and the file download is free on the product listing on the website, and it will fit right inside. The case snaps right on, and it has holes for your wiring. Ideally, if you're going to be storing this on the car externally, you're probably going to want to pot the inside. So that would just be, just like that. Run your wires out through the top, pot the inside of the controller, put your lid on top, just like so, and you're good to go. And the lid does snap on top, so it won't fall off easily. But you definitely want to consider placement in the car and things like that. Ideally, this would be something you'd put inside of the light if you can. But the box does make it so it can be externally mounted if needed. So, for example, I have a switchback halo here. I've turned down my inverter to 6 volts. Which would be similar to what you might see on a Subaru or possibly an Acura or something like that. I've got my ground connected, and I get nothing. It's not enough to do anything for the halo. 6 volt just won't do it. Now, I went ahead and added our controller in between with the same 6 volt going in, connected to the halo on the other side. As you see, it effectively converts that 6 volt input through the controller to the 12 volt output. Plenty bright, fully bright. As I said, one single 110 halo will draw about 0.25 amps. So a pair would be a half amp. This is good to 1 amp, so you would be fine with a pair. If you have a quad setup, you would be okay with one controller for a quad. You don't want to do anything more than that. It would have gotten pretty expensive component-wise to go beyond 1 amp. So that's why we kept it at 1 amp. The main purpose for this, at least for us, is going to be the Ghost controllers, being that is the main thing that we do builds now with is Ghost and addressable. But it is also an option for the switchback halos as well, which was a nice benefit. Obviously a little bit of a limit to how many switchbacks, but 4 is quite a few, and these are the 110s, which are on the larger side. So like an 80 mil or a 70 mil switchback will have far less LEDs and draw less power. So if you measure your load on the halos themselves, you'll know roughly where you're at, but 4 is a pretty good safe point to be. Turn signal function will still work like normal. Those are generally not half volt signals, so that shouldn't be an issue. But theoretically, if you did have a car that had anything that's running half volt, like 6 volt signal wires, and you wanted to up that, this is a way that you could do that. DRL being the most common case point that it will fit. As I said, the box is available on the site to download and print. I do prefer resin printers myself, but that you can definitely print this with an FDM, and it will do fine. I recommend like an ABS or something higher quality. PLA, it does warp with heat and sun and things like that, so you kind of want to avoid that. ABS is a little more sturdy. Obviously, anything with too much heat will melt, so keep that in mind with whatever you decide to go with. So hopefully that all made pretty good sense. There is a diagram picture of the layout for this. It's really simple. You've got your ground, which is marked on the PCB. That's your ground input. Then you have 2 power inputs, and that is your signal 1 and signal 2. And then you've got your ground output and your power output. Now, in the case of Ghost, you do not have to use the ground output. You can just run your power output to the Ghost controller, and it will work fine. You do not have to use the ground, but the ground is there in the event that you're doing something like a Halo or something like that, the switchbacks. That is there for you to use if you need it. On the other side, you do have to send a ground, in addition to 1 or 2 signals. You do not have to run 2 signals to this. If you only want to run 1 to get the up convert from a 6 volt to like a 12 volt signal, that will work perfectly fine, and you can use either one of those inputs to do that. Being what this is, in the event that your DRLs are off or anything like that, this will draw no power, so you won't have to worry about any power consumption on the car itself, because the only time that any power can go to it is in the event that power is being sent through a car signal. So in general, you won't have to worry about that either. But hopefully this is something you guys can use. I know it's definitely something that we plan on using a lot more, especially in the Subarus. I do quite a few Subarus. I have quite a few myself as well. And this will come in handy to simplify installation and just eliminate that extra 12 volt that normally with the diode dynamic option we had to use. Now we won't have to worry about with this. But thanks for watching, and check out the website, nextlevelneo.com.